Hello everyone, my name is Keith Hopper. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Irish Cultural Centre's Digital Literary Festival. The Irish Cultural Centre is based in Hammersmith in London, and for the past 25 years, it's delivered to its patrons the most diverse Irish cultural and educational programme outside of Ireland. The Digital Literary Festival comprises a series of interviews featuring some of the most successful authors in contemporary Irish writing. We'll be discussing and reading from their recent publications. And our interview today is with the author Michelle Gallen, whose wonderful debut novel, Big Girl, Small Town, was published earlier this year to very well-deserved acclaim. So, Michelle, where are you speaking from? Where are you at the moment?
I live in Dublin now, so I'm speaking to you. I'm about a stone's throw from Kilmainham Jail and the Guinness Brewery right now, which is a kind of nice middle point for me.
That's a good place to be. I'm here in England on holidays in Devon. In the normal course of events, we'd be having this conversation on stage, obviously, in the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, in front of a live audience. It would involve a lot of travel, but you would have the energy of an audience, the questions from a very cultured crowd, on Zoom in two countries. How has this been for you, the whole lockdown coronavirus thing?
Whoa. It's been really interesting, I guess, because I managed to launch my book kind of in the mouth of the pandemic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I had a completely traditional launch. We had hundreds of people in a room in a bookshop in Dublin, and then we went on to Dublin or to London and with my kids and my husband, and we toured around, and I went into bookshops and signed books and did all sorts of things that involved humans and contact and face-to-face. It was a really unusual experience. And I think the day after my final book signing, which was in Tyrone, we went back to Dublin and pulled our kids out of school because the virus had started community transmission at that point. And from that minute on, it was a series of cancellations, everything that had been lined up. The kind of like dream author experience of being able to go out and meet people and do festivals and just have this kind of amazing experience was just finished. Everything got cancelled. Yeah. So
it was good you got to launch it at least. I noticed from your website actually that you describe yourself as a digital learning veteran. Through illness, the digital world. So you're coming to that at a very good time. How has that been over the lockdown?
There's a lot of interesting screen and privacy stuff going on with this digital stuff.
Absolutely.
So Magella is someone who's very conscious of being observed, right? She's conscious of surveillance from the British government and British troops. She's conscious of how her community surveil her. She's conscious of always being looked at. And I think it's a feeling that I'm not very comfortable with, you know?
Yeah. I just finished recording a series of lectures, pre-recorded lectures, using a software program called Panopto.
I know Panopto, yeah.
I mean, no one seems to have gotten the irony that this is the panopticon, the kind of all-seeing eye that surveils everything. And I mean, I felt that as I was giving these things to a wall, not knowing who's going to hear this, who is receiving the message, how they're reading it. It was quite terrifying. So I thought your novel seems very timely, actually. Tell us about this. So you grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Tell us a little bit about that. You grew up in this surveillance culture.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you grow up in it, you think it's very normal, right? When I grew up in the North, I can remember once we did this cross-community trip, not cross-community, but one of these international peace trips where they would go, okay, so the problem with Northern Ireland is that Catholics and Protestants aren't really getting on, so we're just going to put them all on a boat and send them to Denmark. And then they're going to make friends with Danish people, come back, and everything's going to be okay. But I went on a couple of those peace trips, which they're just so fascinating. But when we had the Danish people come back and they visited our town, so they'd been kind of warned about the North, and they'd done a bit of history, and like they weren't the first year from their school to come visit Northern Ireland. But when one of the girls walked out in the street with us, and I think we were taking her to mass, as she did, and she was walking down the street, and the British patrol was coming down, and she started sort of having a panic attack. I wouldn't have recognized a panic attack at the time, but now when I look back at it, she was panicking. And she said, they have guns, they have guns, they have guns. And I was like, yeah, they've guns, like,
Yeah.
and she was like, but are they real?
Yeah.
I was like, in what world would they not be real? And then after Mass, you know, there was a bomb scare, and we were all told we had to leave. You know, when you have a bomb scare, I mean, there's all different levels of them, right? But we were said there's a bomb scare. We assumed it was a hoax. We thought maybe somebody had done it just to kind of show the tourists a bit of local excitement, that kind of a thing. So we were all like, oh, bomb scare, we have to leave by the back door of the chapel. But the Danish visitors, like, some of them were in tears. They were absolutely panicked. And we were thinking, but how are we going to get to our cross-community disco? Because we had a cross-community disco organized. But they were like, just like, how are we going to leave this country alive? And it takes a long time to realize what your normal is not other people's normal, you know?
That's one of the things that I really, really admired about your novel and the character in Magella, is that you found a way to look at things that are familiar from a kind of slightly outside perspective. There's a lovely scene later on, the Polish co-worker in the chip shop, Jan Paul, again, seeing the events of the chip shop night through his eyes. It's hilarious. I mean, that kind of defamiliarized.
Yeah.
I mean, when did you figure out you wanted to be a writer, to try and make sense, presumably, of this stuff?
I think I was good with words very early, but I wanted to be an artist, and I'd actually applied to go to art college. And although I got really good grades, they didn't like me enough to let me into art college, and I failed to get into art college, and I had to do my second choice, which was English literature in Trinity. And at that stage, I'd already been writing, and I'd won a few awards and stuff, but I didn't think of writing as my path. And not getting into art college meant that, I mean, I felt really stung by that for years. I just stopped painting and I stopped drawing. And then I focused more on writing then when I was in college. But I think doing an English literature degree can be quite crippling, right? Because all you do from day one is basically go, and here's James Joyce, and here's Seamus Heaney, and here's mostly men, mostly white, all writing these things. And I found it very hard there wasn't a voice like mine when I was in college. I couldn't see, there weren't very many women writers. And when there were women writers, they were in their own module of women writers, you know? It was, I mean, it's a wonderful education in some ways. And in other ways, it took me a long time to find my confidence after that.
I mean, I had the same experience studying English, never read a female writer until I met my wife, who insisted I did. You know, like it was almost institutionally against women's voices. It's quite shocking when you look at it now. Again, I suppose you took it as almost natural at the time. And also, I suppose, if you're learning how to read critically, you become a very critical writer. That's also the crippling part.
And if you're already incredibly self-critical, and you're already dealing with voices in your own head, and then to add, you know, intelligent male voices, it can become quite a soup. I mean, it took me, I mean, I know I had like a long journey. I had a longer than expected journey to becoming a writer anyway, because I had a brain injury. But I did find, I was living in London at the point just before I collapsed. And I can remember reading Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar for the first time. And I remember reading it going, who is this angry, objectionable young woman who's so clever and so scathing and so great? But of course, she's falling apart in the book. It's not a full story of her overcoming everything. And, you know, but I can remember that being one of those revelatory sort of texts that I just hadn't read anything like that by a female to that point.
And what about other female Irish writers? Were they there? I mean, I know O'Brien was the only one that I could kind of...
Yeah, and I didn't read Country Girls until I think I was in my 30s. So this isn't just about were the writers there, but were they put in your hands? I mean, I can remember when I was about 17, somebody giving me Robert McLean Wilson's Ripley Bogle, and I can remember thinking, this is much more. This is how I feel things, and this is also like irreverent and angry and kind of not this neat narrative of how
Yeah.
things work out.
Yeah. I think a lot of Northern
Yeah.
Irish writers cite that novel as a turning point, a permission to use your own voice, your own idiom.
Yeah. It wasn't Seamus Heaney, and Seamus Heaney, and I adore Seamus Heaney, and Seamus Heaney's poetry feels very, it's incredibly familiar to me in the sense that when I read it, I know that landscape. I feel at home when I read Heaney, but he's not angry.
Yeah.
And he's really cultured and he's really clever. But when I read, you know, Ripley Bogle, which is incredibly clever, I just felt it's nice to see a character unleashed,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that was an important one. But I also, I mean, I loved Brianne Moore's The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
Yeah, fantastic. He's without a canon, fantastic writer. Yeah.
He's an amazing writer, but that one in particular for me, it's like a little skinny volume and it just nails this. Oh, it nails that character. It's an incredibly powerful
Beautiful
work,
book, yeah.
You know.
And Catholics, another fantastic novel. Let me.
Yeah.
You wrote a number of short stories before writing your first novel. How different is that to writing a novel, writing a short story? Is it a whole different?
Ooh. I don't know, because I hear a lot of writers who are incredibly, eloquent about their craft. I was writing short stories quite early, and it's kind of like I literally would just get an idea for a story and I would sit down and just be in this world in my head and then just write it all down. And so when I was writing Magella, I'd only ever written the short stories, and usually it was that experience of here's an idea and it would just come completely formed and I'd sit down and get it all out. And because I had a brain injury, I was quite concerned that I couldn't make the leap from this perfectly formed world of maybe 3,000 words to 100,000 novel, because to do that you couldn't drop the book and come back, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so when I had the idea for Magella, which came from a short story, I just took a month off work and wrote 70,000 words in a month.
Wow.
Which was my way of going, if I stop this, I can't pick it up again. I may not have the brain to do this. I don't want to let go. And I just did 70,000 words in a month. And it took me a long time to finish it, like 3 years to finish it.
Yeah.
But having 70,000 words down made me feel like I had a lump.
It's impressive. I interviewed John McGahern many years ago, and he said that's how he wrote. He wrote in a blur, and then, I mean, I think it took him nearly 10 years to edit amongst women. You know, that it's a process of editing and...
Editing. So this is for me at the minute. I've got like 110,000 words of my next one done. Wow. And it's called Factory Girls. And my husband's like, but you've written it. And I'm going, no, because for me, the whole thing is like, but editing it just, and I mean, perhaps I'm painfully slow at it. I mean, I guess I had a couple of things going on. It took me 3 years to finish the book I originally wrote, pretty much in a month. But it took me 10 years to find a publisher, was the first thing for Magella. And for Factory Girls, I'm hoping that my publisher will pick this one up. It would be great. But I guess when you have an editor editing with you, it's a lot faster. Yeah. You know, it's not as nitpicky as you might be yourself.
How, you know, if you were advising a young writer, how do you put up with 10 years of rejection before you crack this? I'm sure your next novel is going to be picked up straight away, because this is such a cultured, coherent, witty, warm book. You know, it really is, you know, big.
Yeah, I think the thing about writing for 10 years is that in the 10 years I was trying to find a publisher. I mean, I started 2 companies and I had 2 children. I think I moved maybe 20 times in those 10 years. Yeah. I was very busy. It wasn't like, I think the thing that's really fascinating is, you know, people often talk about how hard it is to be a woman in tech. And I honestly find it much easier to be a successful female in tech than it was to be a female writer. And that is quite an issue, I think. Yeah. If it was that hard to break through, then I'm quite interested in what was going on in the world of publishing, or in the world of kind of like amplifying voices that are not typical of the sort of white middle class British or Irish narrative.
Yeah. There are some very warm and genuine quotes on the front and back cover. Sinead Moriarty says, Milkman meets Derry Girls, a cracking read. I mean, that's a lovely tagline.
Yeah.
Sarah Baum says, Bodhi, beautiful, full of everyday tragedy, absurdity, and truth. I grew extraordinarily attached to Magella. As did I. I actually read it all in one go. I stopped reading it because it was a lovely sense of what's going to happen next. Let's explain to people, if they haven't read it, who Magella is. So on the blurb at the back, it has stuff Magella knows. Banana flavored condoms taste the same as nutrition shakes, which is a great line. Another, not everyone gets a volume being lowered into the ground. So this is the stuff she knows. And then stuff Magella doesn't know. Why her ma drinks. She's got a terrible alcoholic mother. Very nasty character, actually. I found her very great.
Yeah.
Where her dad is, her dad has disappeared, IRA related, we don't know. And then this line that she is autistic. And yeah. I was unsure about, is Magella really autistic? Because I didn't get that if I hadn't read the blurb. I thought she has a shyness that I have experienced. She has a shrewd eye. She can hold conversations. She can hold people in the eye when she needs to, which doesn't seem to me to be classically on that spectrum.
So I think somebody's idea of autistic always depends on what they've seen in their own lives and what they've seen in media. And pretty much what I think has happened has the idea of autism has been formed again by white males. Yeah. And so boys have been diagnosed at a much greater rate than females. And what we're finding now is that the prevalence of autism in males and females is probably the same. The difference comes in our expectations of how we expect women to behave. So small girls are socialized much more intensively and much more harshly, I will say, than small boys are. I have autistic family members, and the males get diagnosed before they're 5. The females hit their teens, they hit their 30s, they hit their 40s, they hit their 70s, and might still be undiagnosed. Yeah. So one of the big things about talking about autism is Magella to me, is a classic example of someone who doesn't know they're autistic, who has learned to mimic ordinary behaviors. She's learned how to mask her behaviors. So she's considered kind of like a rare duck. You know, she's kind of awed by the people around her. But a female relative of mine got a very late diagnosis of autism. And despite the fact I know a lot about it, I went off and read about the specifically female presentation. And it was jaw-dropping for me. It was like, oh, wow, that, you know, I just thought it was astonishing that I felt I was informed on the topic, but when I read it, it kind of changed my perception of my own life and people I know as well. So autism is a very complex, I'm not sure if I would even call it a condition, but I think it's a very complex presentation. Being non-neurotypical is in some ways just really fascinating and incredible. And I think if Magella had a diagnosis of autism, it would have perhaps changed how it might reduce the pain levels in her life, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, although she'd be labelled in a different way. From being odd, she'd have some...
Autistic, but I mean, if you look at, so basic things like if you're a boy and you're diagnosed at the age of 3, the financial supports and the educational supports that are in place for you from that point until females that I know getting diagnosed in their teens have missed out a decade of support and help. Also, it's quite interesting to see that, you know, if being taught how to mask your autism is considered an important thing, particularly for women, because it's good for women to be biddable and to appear, compliant. I just think autism is one of those fascinating things that it says so much about our society and it says so much about gender expectations and no,
it's really complicated, and I think you capture beautifully. It actually set me off reading as well, because then I thought, my God, I'm shamefully ignorant of this. And I was reading passages to my wife, who's a psychotherapist. She was thrilled. She said, yes, that's spot on. That's spot on. And she, I think, would have gotten the diagnosis quicker than me. And
So somebody, when I was in my book launch, I was interested because there was a queue of people waiting to get the book signed. And I noticed 3 women in the queue. And I thought, and this is the side of my eye, this is just me doing my eye contact with the person in front of me and these women. So when the first one came up, she said, "Hi, I'm autistic and I've read your proof. I really loved it. You've got it." So she came up and said it. The second woman came up and she didn't do eye contact. She said, I loved your book. And then she finger flicked at me. And I was like, "I got you." And then the third woman came up, didn't identify in any way, but I would have said in my head, from the side of my eye, from just how she was interacting with the room and how she was interacting with the queue and how she then came and interacted with me, I would wonder about the third one. So I'm just interested in body language, and many people don't, I think many women aren't aware of their autism.
Yeah, it's interesting, Magella gets criticized, I think it's by her mother, for the finger flicking and the thing, and it's great.
Oh, the mother has done a great job in socializing Magella to the point that Magella is acceptable at mass, at a wake, in a funeral, and in a chip shop.
Yeah.
You know, she's done the whole kind of like very top level socialization, but does she care about Magella's actual feelings? So
Magella, let's give people the plot. She works in a chip shop. She turns 27 over the course of the novel. She's quietly strong. She is a big girl. She eats a lot of chips and bars, and she's in a very suffocatingly small town. Would you read the opening for us? Would that be okay? Would you be up for that?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Because I really don't want to, because the idiom in this is so important. It needs a female voice, but I think it also needs a female northern voice.
Yeah, no, I can do it. And I have to say, Nicola Coughlan did the audiobook, and she is not from the north. But she did a very good job. Great job. Yeah. She did, yeah. I think that she learned her northern accent doing Derry Girls, and this Big Girl was her first audiobook.
Really?
And
she's great.
Yeah, her very first one. I was like, oh, yeah, no.
I listened to it yesterday. Her intro was very shy, and then she suddenly is Magella. It's terrific.
Yeah. So I loved the idea that she hadn't done an audiobook, and apparently we were incredibly lucky to get her. So I was really pleased about that. Bit of a fangirl. So that's Big Girl, Small Town, and I'm assuming it's coming up backwards, but I'll read the opening then. Yeah. Okay. Magella kept a list of stuff in her head that she wasn't keen on. Her top 10 hadn't changed in 7 years. 1, small talk, bullshit, and gossip. 2, physical contact. 3, noise. 4, bright lights. 5, scented stuff. 6, contour. 7, sweating. 8, jokes. 9, makeup. And 10, fashion. The full list of things Magella wasn't keen on extended to 97 items with subcategories for each item. For example, makeup included nail polish, lipstick, foundation, mascara, etc. And Magella had further itemized each subcategory. Item 9.1, makeup, nail polish. It's too heavy, weighing fingers down, looks utterly unnatural when colored, E.G, red, orange, black, giving people the appearance of wearing beetle carapaces on their finger ends. Difficult to apply, requires practice, time, and skill. Prone to smudging during the drying period. It's impermanent, cracks and flakes, sometimes in hours, but always within days. Requires chemicals during the production process and for removal. Complete waste of money. The list of things Magella did see the point in was much shorter. 1, eating. 2, Dallas, except for the 1985 to 86 season, which is also known as Bobby's Dream. 3, UK Gold. 4, her dad. 5, her granny. 6, Smithwick's. 7, painkillers. 8, cleaning. 9, sex. And 10, her dryers. Sometimes Magella thought that she could condense her whole list of things she wasn't keen on onto a single item. Other people. It was people who talked shit. It was people who made up rules that said you were cool or not because of what you wore. It was people who judged one half of the human race for not wearing makeup and the other half for wearing it. It was people who switched on lights, made noise, sweated and fought, wept and shouted. Magella knew when she came down to it, she wasn't keen on other people.
Wonderful. You perform it very well, Michelle. It's great to hear it being read out loud. Those lists punctuate the novel. I mean, it's part of the character, often the very funny effect. Do you find comedy easy to write?
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, being funny was a way of kind of getting somebody's attention and a way of bonding. Like my family would have been, my family would have had quite a Shanachie tradition where we'd, you know, you would go to visit my grandmother and the TV would go off and everybody would start yarning, you know, telling stories like from years ago. And a lot of them were funny. They weren't, you know, they were full of characters and they were full of fun, and, you know, they weren't entirely serious. And then that would be mixed up with really tragic stuff, you know, like my dad lost his sister when he was young, and there would have been a lot of conflict as well, you know, from the Troubles and stuff. So there was this kind of atmosphere where you could grow up and tell a hilarious story 1 second, and then the next minute you'd lead into something very dark.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I was struck by. The Troubles thrum away in the background of this. It colours everyone, everything, but it's very much in the background. The focus is on Magella, how she negotiates it. So we have her uncle Bobby being shot dead by the British Army. Her dad, presumably another IRA man, has disappeared. Was that your thinking from the start, this indirect approach, or did it just evolve over time, talking about the tragedy?
I think so when I wrote this, it was kind of, I mean, how deep were we into the ceasefire? I think maybe about 10 years at that point, and I had this whole thing where, you know, the media narrative was like, oh, the Troubles are over, shut up and go away. It's all grand, which wasn't how I was experiencing things. I was living in Belfast, and it felt like there was a lot of trauma and a lot of anger and a lot of people who were very displaced, people who, when you had the Troubles, had a role and then suddenly didn't have a role. And I think there was when I was growing up, my idea of the Troubles on TV was always, it nearly always had to be, you know, something that starred Liam Neeson or could star Liam Neeson. You know, that idea that'd be, you know, a sort of very intense kind of a person involved in something, and then there'd be an explosion or a shooting, and then it would be men running around. And, you know, it's not how I think most people experience the Troubles. And I thought, and I still think it's really important to kind of, I think the slow business of kind of grief and the slow business of healing are the things that I'm very much interested in. The aftermath. Yeah.
I mean, you can see even from the opening passage you read, there's so much in this that adds depth. I mean, she's very frank about sex. Was that easy to write? I mean, again, that's not something you see normally in that older tradition of Irish literature.
And I think that's just been censored the hell out of us.
For sure.
I don't know, I grew up, my family are very respectable and very lovely, and they're school teachers and priests and the like, you know. But my own friends would have been incredibly frank about what they liked and what they didn't, and who they might like to do things with. And there was this kind of schism between the good little girls we were taught to be and expected to be with the Catholic Church on one side, and then this actual, well, we have contraception and we have pubs and we, you know, we have a choice in what we are going to do. So I find it easy to be frank about, I find it very easy to get into Magella's head, and very enjoyable to be in the head of a strong woman who makes choices around sex. She doesn't have a lot of choice, but she makes the best of the choice she does have.
She's very smart. I love this. There was a scene later on in the novel, or not, page 42. She's fully aware of how the world is structured. She says at one point, this is a quote, Magella realized that the world in her library books, in which children went rambling on moors and swimming in rivers, was different to her world. I mean, that's an observation. And I think you're with her all the way once you realize she has that acute vision, which is very the dialogue, it's written in idiom. Was that difficult to do, or did it just flow naturally? Was that, again, another aesthetic choice?
It was really easy to do idiom, and actually there was a lot more in the very first version, so it actually had to be pulled back a bit, because it would have been, because I see it and I hear it when I'm writing, then to me it's it's actually very easy to put it down. But then there's a process I go through when I'm editing where I'm kind of going, how do you keep it authentic but make it accessible to as many people as possible? That's a whole other level of challenge.
I mean, the dialogue obviously lends itself to radio very well. I mean, would you consider turning it into a stage play or even a teleplay?
So I think I'm still under a negotiation here, so I can't really say much. There's nice news in the pipeline.
Because it struck me that the comparison with Milkman, which you quote beautifully from in your epigraph, and Derry Girls is well made. And I just thought, given the structure of the novel, you know, Magella works 6 days a week in the chipper, Monday to Saturday, Sunday off. It would work as episodes. So
so there's a very
we won't put you under pressure, but we'll come back to you again sometime.
Okay.
I was just thinking about the 7 chapters, the way it's structured over a week. It's very effective. Again, was that something that evolved through redrafting and re-editing, or?
No, I was recovering from a brain injury and I was terrified that I couldn't do a backwards and forwards narrative. And I thought, if I'm going to keep it, if I'm going to keep this under control, I will do a week. It was very deliberate that I wanted to show that with Magella, every day is much like the same day. I mean, I could have done it over 10 years, but actually nothing has changed in her life, her 7 days or her 7 days.
Yeah. I mean, some of the repetitions are great, and there's a punchline to one of them. We won't spoil it, but one of the characters batter sausage and making this tepid, sexist joke every night. One of the things that comes across very strongly in this is the sense of place. I mean, there's a great time structure, but there's a great sense of space in it. Is it Ahi Bogie?
Ahi Bogie.
Ahi Bogie.
Ahi Bogie. Yeah, it's a soft kind of. It's not Aki or Aggie like. I just have this really early memory of my grandparents are from a place called Achiarn, and you would anytime there was a kind of like a drama or an event or something would happen, it would be on the news and they'd go Aggie Bogie, and I'd be like Achiarn, and I'd be like, no, it's just not that's just hurts us. And I just think it's really interesting that many reporters can pronounce, you know, Arab name places which require that same, you know, and they do it beautifully. But when it comes to Irish place names, we get the hard CK or the hard AG sort of.
I mean, it's a real bugbear. I'm glad you went for it. Magella herself describes the town as a town in which there was nowhere to hide, so people hid their stuff in plain sight, which is a lovely, again, observation. I saw on one internet forum that it's Ahibogie is thinly disguised version of Castle Derg. Is that right?
People can say that. I grew up Castle Derg was an amazing place to grow up in many ways, not least because it's full of brilliant people, like absolute characters and people who took care of other people, you know. But Castle Derg was the sort of town where, you know, if you needed kind of, if an American film crew was coming in and going, can we have a really deeply divided town, then we were the sort of small town where you could kind of go Protestants that way, Catholics that way, and the riots happen in the middle, you know. And it's massively changed now, but when I was growing up, it was a kind of a sort of a little mini version of everything that was wrong with the North. And the things that were also amazing, like really strong sense of community and people who care about their history and people who cared about each other as well.
Magella's very funny. She's never had a chip in the Proddy chip shop. I mean, all of that resonates so strong. How have people from your hometown reacted to this?
So I haven't been home because there's been a pandemic. I haven't been able to go home. I've been home maybe twice, and I haven't actually been back into the town to talk to many people. A lot of people who've contacted me have just said it's really funny, and they think that's really important. I'm hoping that it's been well received. I know that my parents have a kind of mini business at the minute where they have people come and knocking at the door and then they sell the books out to whoever comes in. So, you know, I mean, it's costing them a fortune in cups of tea, but sure, you know.
Well, that's parental pride at its best.
Yeah. There's no bookshops though in our part of the world. So it literally is like there's a shop in in Castleberry called Dinny McCrory's, and Dinny sold my books and had a book launch for me. It's like one of these amazing, yeah. So they're very good to me.
Good. One thing that really struck me, I mean, there's, the backdrop of the sectarian divide, but Magella, because she's so bright, is aware of structural inequalities. I really liked her memories of her school days, that terrible streaming. I mean, I underwent that. The way that poor kids were picked on by teachers as opposed to the middle class. You're very aware of those inequalities. It's not always the case in contemporary Irish fiction. Again, is that something you set out to address? Is that a gap you saw?
I mean, a lot of this comes from my parents who were, that generation of Catholics who actually got to go to university or got to go to college for the first time. My dad was involved in civil rights, and my parents very much came from a generation where they could see the inequalities and that they could see the things that were so wrong, and they believed that society could be made more equal and that people could be, judged in a different way. Not even judged, actually maybe not judged, but so I guess I grew up always with this idea that what you saw on television or heard on the radio or read in a book might not actually be the truth, and that you might need to fight for the things you believe in. And I do think it's very interesting. I mean, I think there's such a difference in growing up in Northern Ireland compared to growing up in the Republic of Ireland, and just this, it's not just that we had a different education system and a different postal system, and that we had the British soldiers on our streets. There just seems to be so much more that we were still fighting for, for such a long time. And it made, and having said that, I also think that when you have to fight for things, you get exhausted, I think. And I mean, the idea that we're still working on getting abortion. I mean, I know we're allowed it now, but we don't actually have it. It's one of these things where you kind of go. When I worked in the BBC back in, I think it was about 2002, I was pitching, documentaries to them, and I was like, I said, we really need to get a documentary about abortion because we don't even have a legal position here, and this is something that all my friends were talking about, that this is something was such a big issue for us as young women in Northern Ireland. You couldn't open that conversation because the conversation in the North was still very much about troubles, and it was sectarian. It was all about drama and violence, and not about things like abortion or access to mental health services, for example. There were a lot of things that I think people were fighting for stuff and using their energy in different ways, and it cost us in terms of society, and it cost us personally, I think.
It's interesting. I thought that the legacy of violence still survives in the town of the novel. I mean, without ruining the plot, there's a violent death in the novel that Magella is still figuring out how to make sense of. I mean, that's deliberate, that the trauma doesn't disappear, that it's still in the air, it's hanging there.
Well, I think trauma takes generations. I think the Republic of Ireland really is only getting over sort of the trauma it had from independence, pretty much when the people who lived through that died off. The kind of actual lived experience becomes proper history, as in, proper history, what history is ever proper, but maybe, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I don't have enough conversations with people around this, is like, I know what people my age feel and felt, and I can remember very strongly being proud of the different voice that was coming out of the North with the likes of Lyra McKee, who was shot dead in Derry last year. And I remember thinking, I remember feeling so almost jealous of Lyra and how strong her voice was, and how she talked about things that we weren't even, you just didn't talk about being gay when I was young, and you did not talk about, rights and the things that you should have. It wasn't how I was raised, and it seemed to me to be this powerful new way of positioning what we could be as, just as people. So I would be interested to see where the generation below Lyra's goes, because there is that danger you can glorify what we went through.
For sure.
Which was shit. No harm, it was shit. you can glorify that, because I'm going to be interested to see how the Republic of Ireland decides to commemorate partition and Northern Ireland. I believe Boris Johnson has taken a personal interest in commemorating partition of Ireland.
Great.
Yeah. Can't wait for that.
Yeah. Towards the end of the book, Magella, who is aware, I suppose, of the performative power of literature, she reflects on the power of fairy tales. And there's a lovely quote in it I have here: someone waving a wand or performing a trick so that everything turns out all right in the end. I mean, you don't wave a magic wand in the end, but you do give her a shot at happiness, which I found, again, very important, very refreshing. It's open-ended. Do you think she takes the little opportunity you give her, or does she stay where she is, a big girl in a small town? Or do you?
I think her town is very important for her, and I'm not convinced that leaving that town would make Magella happier. I think that often people, including myself, can bounce from one place to the next place to try and seek happiness, and that's not. They mean the old thing is that's, you know, you can live in Paris and New York and London or Hoboken, and it's you who needs to find.
Yeah.
So what I would love for Magella, I do feel it would be really important for her to find her own home.
Yeah.
And in that town, and to kind of move out of the very toxic influence of her mother.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's something that would allow her to breathe, and I would love Magella to try different food. And I would. She
dreams at one point, doesn't she? Her ideal home would be above the chip shop, so she doesn't have to very far. Yeah.
But honestly, and like honestly, she's like, it would be that if your one would just die, because if she could rent the flats above the shop, you know, and. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a big fan of happiness wherever you find it, rather than misery and glamorous surroundings.
So what next for you? Would you ever revive Magella and follow her next steps in a sequel, or are you entirely devoted to something new? You said you've got a lot of word count done. Now the editing, I assume, takes precedence.
Yeah, so I've got the second book, Factory Girls, and I'm just trying to get that good enough, or you know, convince myself it's good enough to send to my agent and editor and get their feedback. And I started a third book as well, which was a lot of fun. And then I had to stop doing that one because I have to finish the second book.
Yeah.
And I would love to do a sequel for Magella.
Oh, good.
Because I have a really clear idea in my head of what happens to her. And I'd love to write it. It's, you know, yeah, it's interesting because in one sense I have all this time in that, you know, I'm not doing my digital learning work at the minute, but I'm also homeschooling my children, which I find 2 hours of that is the equivalent of 20 hours of running a marathon. So
sounds you're doing pretty well to me. Factory Girls.
Yeah, so I did work in a shirt factory myself for a while, and so it's an experience that never left me, and I've always wanted to work on that, to write that down. So not my personal experience, but that world of women and work and machines and money and pieces. So I just had to write that, if you know what I mean.
So what would your teenage self, the person who worked in a factory, what would she have thought if they knew that one day you'd be publishing this highly praised novel, writing potentially a sequel and several other? What would your teenage self?
Oh, she would have been delighted. She would have been scared what her mother would think.
Very good.
Yeah.
Maybe that's nearly an hour. I think maybe that's a good place to stop on the Irish Mammy.
I am one now. That's the worst of it. That is the worst of it. That's the trick that nobody tells you, that sooner or later you may indeed become one, and there you are trying to. Yeah.
And then you realize your poor mother. How did she put up with it all?
She had 6 of us.
Oh my
and
God.
she had 6 of us in 8 years, and she taught the primary 1 classroom in Castledarg, and she had 30 4-year-olds every day, and then would come home to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, good for her. Good for you too. We'll stop it there. Michelle Gallen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me, and to the Cultural Centre as well. It is a fabulous place in London, and I really, really wish that I can get over there soon.
Well, hopefully there'll be a vaccine and we'll all meet there in the new year. And I should say, anyone interested in buying a copy, you don't have to go to the back door of Michelle's parents. Go on to the Irish Cultural website, you'll find a link, and that'll get you a copy in jig time. So thank you all for listening, and stay well.